Let's begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. God our Father, this evening we bring a dream and a vision before you. We ask you to bless it through the power of your Spirit, and we ask that we may find people who will support this project and help to give the honor and glory that we want to give to you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project that we've been working on and how we got there, how we've arrived at this point. A lot of that focuses on the current condition of our instrument. This project we're calling Sanctuary Restoration Project, making all things new at St. Patrick Parish. And this phase focuses on the front of the sanctuary, which, as you can see, has a dramatic impact with the pipe organ. This state of the organ address, if you will, is going to talk a little bit about the history of our current organ, its design, its installation, the condition as it sits now, and some concerns that we have. And then what do we do to move forward? So the organ was designed, installed in 1967, roughly 1968. That's what the nameplate says. At this time in history in the Catholic Church, organs were practically not used for full congregational singing as we use them today. In the Protestant churches, they've been singing hymns with full organ for 400 or 500 years. Catholics were primarily organ accompanying the choir, accompanied the priest for some chant. It was very, very laid-back, subdued music. Was not really intended for an instrument put in a Catholic church to fill and to carry a congregation. The Second Vatican Council changed the whole approach of how we worship. You know, they turned the altar around. Mass was being said in English. We started singing hymns, everything in English. There was a big drastic change, and a lot of the folks who made decisions really did not quite grasp how the organ would work in that regard and what the future might be. This is a very interesting piece of information that came to light, was in our files in the parish. This was included in the documents that went back and forth between the pastor of St. Patrick at the time, I believe was Father Ellis, when this church was being built. And if you read, the organ chamber as provided is too small. It will be necessary to hang the great pedal and positive divisions on the front wall. This will not detract from the beauty of the building, but enhance it. This was dated 1966. So even back then, before this building was built, that was the plan that the diocesan architects and the music consultants for the Archdiocese of Detroit were suggesting. This organ chamber and the way the organ is positioned was practically an afterthought. Why it wasn't originally installed this way is pretty much anybody's guess. More from the letter, from the organ consultants to the Archbishop, or at the time, the Cardinal Dearden. Organ chamber as provided is too small. Organs, they were considering both Cassavant, who we wound up having build our instrument, as well as Moeller, which is another pipe organ company who's no longer in existence. Their specifications are too small for a church seating 1,200 people with a rather high ceiling. Other suggestions, letter D, organs should have at least 36 ranks spread over 4 divisions. Our current instrument is 24 ranks, so considerably smaller than what they were recommending in the 60s. From the Archdiocesan Music Consultants to Father Ellis in 1966. I've re-examined this specification submitted, both inadequate in size. Either organ proposal as it stands is good. Personal preference was for Moeller, yet we chose Cassavant. Cassavant has gone Baroque in their new designs, which I hardly feel is what is needed in the average parish. However, I do not say that the Cassavant design is not good. Basically, what we knew then and we know now is that the organ of this size is too small for a room this big. The tonal design is very Baroque. It's a bright sounding instrument, making it challenging to sing with because all you hear is the upper pitch rather than the foundation, the low frequency stops. That makes a huge, huge difference in terms of accompanimental participation. The other issue that those of you who sit out in the pew don't really get a sense of is it is very loud at the choir. The choir gets nailed with organ sound, which if you love the organ sound, hey, that's fantastic. It's very hard to sing, very hard to hear each other. I see a few choir people here, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They've been complaining about this for years, I suspect. Why are we going to even do anything? That basically boils down to the fact that the organ now is 50 years old and it is starting to show serious signs of needing major overhaul. The location of the organ we know is a problem. There have been improvements made over the year in terms of some additions that were done, I believe, around 1991 or 92. Then again, small additions made in, I think, 2001, pretty much to make it as large as it possibly could be in the condition, in the space that it actually is. And then, of course, I'm talking about the current condition of the organ. The current condition is really what's thrusting us into having to make a decision. What we're trying to avoid is a situation where we don't have an instrument that functions on a regular basis. With a pipe organ, there are 3 areas that can fail. The first of which is the leather. All of the pipes that you see basically sit on a wooden constructed box. They, underneath each pipe, there's a series of channels that are routed through the wood that have leather components, magnets, springs, some other electronics inside there. The leather, like any piece of material, ages over time. It's 50 years old. It has become dry, brittle. If you were to actually access it and scrape it, you would feel it kind of break off in your fingers. What that does is that causes the stuck notes. For example, a hymn with that on all the time. And that happens throughout the organ on other stops as I'm playing. Notes will stick on, and it's a head. It happens. There's no way around it. Water and leather don't mix. Neither does water and wood. Neither does water in untreated metal. So water damage got into some of the pipes, some of the low bass pipes, really the fundamental sounds of the organ that we already have reduced quantities of. Doesn't play. Doesn't play. Barely plays. Doesn't play. Over the years, there were several attempts by the parish to, in fact, you'll see many of these are addressed to Peter, my predecessor. Proposal A, I just have 2 or 3 proposals. You can see some numbers. Just for discussion's sake, back in, what is that dated? 2001, approximately 92,000, not including any structural or casework. Proposal B was 82,000 plus 35,000. Again, still inadequate in size, did not include any of the visual casework that would cover up the organ. A third proposal, this was the company that actually represents Cassavant, who is the manufacturer of our current organ. Their proposal amounted to 175,000 back in 2001. It would only increase the organ by 4 ranks, still 5 ranks smaller than the minimum recommended by the Archdiocese of Detroit back in 1966. When you factor in that to today's dollars, Cassavant, the company in Quebec that built this current organ, visited, must have been, I believe, October of last year, and they quoted me ballpark figures, about $500,000 just to rebuild and relocate without any significant tonal changes. We would be responsible for building the structure. We brought in a local firm, Covenant Organ Company. They visited and they assessed the instrument. They estimated about $300,000 or more to rebuild, relocate the instrument, but recommended enlarging the organ to suit needs. So again, we're at the 300 plus to work with what we have. They suggested we consider another option, and that's when this St. Benedict organ entered the picture. So working with Covenant Organs, who are here tonight, as well as the architect that they employ, we've put together this idea, and when I roll out how the costs all lay out, I think you'll find it not only comparable in terms of the minimum that we could do with this organ, but why it's a fantastic idea. So, the big question that people ask immediately, all right, we're talking about, we have problems with a 50-year-old organ, why are we considering an organ from the 30s? Every classification of instrument, whether it be a piano, a guitar, a violin, etc., they all have their golden eras, and I'm going to refer to that periodically. Steinway, for instance, we have a Steinway, which I'm very thrilled to play every week. Their motto is that we've been building the same piano for over 100 years. They've not really changed. They got it right in the late late 1800s, and that's how they build a piano today. Same woods, same materials, as much as they possibly can. The pianos are crafted pretty much the same way they were 100 years ago, and that's what pianists and other artists prefer. The 50s Gibson Les Paul, for instance, those instruments are valued at $500,000 or more. Every guitar maker attempts to recreate that sound. It's the materials, it's the way it was assembled, all of that stuff. The Stradivarius violin, priceless instruments valued at $15 million or more. Same situation. Violin manufacturers, they use Stradivarius as the yardstick for measuring the quality of instruments. So when it comes to instruments, the golden era, if you will, for the pipe organ was that era between the mid-20s to approximately the 40s. And when we learned about the possibility to get one of these instruments, it was just kind of a unique, magical moment. And it gets better when I tell you a little more about the process. So this organ is a 1935 Kilgan organ from St. Benedict. It was rescued, we removed it. The diocese closed the church. It is now operated by a Baptist church. They have no need for the organ. It was basically, come get it and it's yours. In a historic restoration, we're talking all of the pipes and the instruments are completely cleaned, removed, repaired as needed. All new mechanicals constructed, everything that's not related to producing that beautiful tone, state-of-the-art electronic controls. Installation includes all of the framing work, all of the important stuff that we would have to deal with if we were talking with Cassavant is done by their company. In the restored case, which is the facade, be erected around the organ mechanicals as seen in the drawings. Voicing and regulation, just basically making the organ fit like a glove for this room. Here's what's very unusual. Organ transplants, not in the medical sense, but in the musical sense, are not a very rare thing, mainly because a lot of churches just simply can't afford the $1 million+ price tag that a new pipe organ costs these days. If we were to have a new pipe organ constructed from scratch to fit this room, it would be $1.5 million proposal, no questions asked. So when churches look to install an organ or replace another instrument, used instruments or previously used, however you want to, if you want to use, used car salesman terminology, fine. But relocating an organ is a pretty commonplace thing. However, in almost every single circumstance, major league changing to the organ has to occur. I'm talking from the visual display, the structure. You don't just pick up one organ from one room, take it to a completely different design from a completely different era, and set it down, except here. And that was what was so unique about this. When I showed the images, picking up an organ and putting it into another room just flat out does not happen. Part of why the notion of moving that organ to here is so expensive is because that's essentially what we would be doing it. Taking it from that space in this room and moving it to this space, there's nothing comparable between that space and this space up here. So finding an organ that sits perfectly in split cases that fits the available footprint was just unbelievable. Once we kind of had the idea that this would actually work, I thought, well, what are we going to do about the choir? For all these years, 50 years that the choir has sung in front of the organ, they've had the organ too loud. It's been knocking them over. They can't hear themselves. If we take the organ away, all of a sudden, they have nothing to accompany. The organ sits up in the air and above. They'll certainly be able to hear it, but they won't have that intimacy with an accompanimental instrument like they currently do. So the story goes, I took some pictures of this instrument at St. Benedict, and I took some recording, put it all together, and put it up on YouTube, mainly just to share with some other organ people who had an interest in this sort of thing. Well, a fella out of St. Louis emails me. He tried calling me at the office like 4 times in one day. So I was a little hesitant to tell him what we were thinking of doing, I didn't feel like I needed to qualify him and tell him what our business kind of a thing. Once I kind of got the sense that he was interested and felt like sharing a little bit of the project, he said, well, what are you going to do with your choir? I said, well, we'll probably find some ranks from about that era to give them something quiet to accompany the choir. He said, well, there's a free organ in Boston. That's a 1930s Kilgan. It would be perfect. Okay, so after 3 or 4 days, Father Tom and I were able to get in touch with the priest who is at the Serbian Orthodox Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and they gave me dimensions of that organ. To the inch fits in that hole. So not only did we find one organ that fits perfect dimensions, but 2 organs that fit from 2 totally different places, same manufacturer, of course. Proposed estimate for doing this with both instruments completely restored, which not only includes the organ, but also changes that'll need to be made to the audiovisual system. Of course, we can't have the screen here with these credenzas, because that will all be moved, as well as when we remove the current organ, the choir platforms need to be extended. So there is much more in terms of the basic, just putting an organ in front, that needs to happen. That number, 500,000, is less than what Cassavant quoted to use and to basically move their instrument. So we're talking about a world-class, magnificent pipe organ, probably worth, when it's all said and done, $1.5 million easily, for less than what it would cost to deal with our current instrument. So when we started realizing these sort of things falling into place, what benefits exist? Well, the basic things, the obvious things, are improved sight lines. Right now, you see the corners of these wing walls? I got the laser here. These little edges, when the choir is there, and I know a few of them again are here, many of the people who sit in the far left chairs, they can't even see the altar around the corner of that wall, which is really kind of a shame. We've had people sing in the choir for 20 or 30 years who really haven't been to Mass because they can't see. The improved sound quality there's no arguing there. The improved atmosphere, that's one thing that I think is an important thing to talk about, because all of a sudden we're going to have a drastic change to the front of the church, a very drastic change to the sound quality, a very drastic change to the worship experience. And what I mean by that is an organ installed properly that's appropriate size of the room. It's not just a sound, it's an experience. It encourages you to sing. It encourages you to really participate on a level that perhaps we've not quite experienced yet. I have a couple of take-home handout things for you, and that's what the next 2 slides are. I refer to them as facts about the current instrument as well as facts about the proposed instrument, and why we're here. This is basically to sum up the whole thing that I've talked about. Cassavant's what we have. It's in need of a complete overhaul. Currently 3 stops with recurring ciphers, which are those notes that just play all the time, that I can't do anything about it. Without an overhaul, the organ is going to soon be unplayable. Even in perfect condition, we know that it's too small, again, documented by the Archdiocese of Detroit architects and music consultants. It has a Baroque organ design, again, bright, very hard to sing with. Another thing that really hasn't even been noticed that I've talked about yet, those of you who come to 10 o'clock Mass, you rarely hear the organ used with the folk group, and that has to do specifically with that Baroque organ design. Bright organs and guitars don't really mix. Contemporary music and bright organs don't mix. This other instrument has increased potential for being used at all the Masses. Not only will it enhance singing at the Masses that are more traditional based, but certainly with the broader tonal base that it has, it's far more likely and much more suitable to be used with other instrumentation. We know that there's no room to expand it in its current location. To compensate for its smaller size, the organ was voiced very loudly, and again, which, as we've already talked about, kills the choir. These points, the Archdiocese advised that the organ be installed in the front, which is what we're hoping to rectify. They also advised that the organ is too small, which we've talked about several times. Overhaul relocation with expansion, we know is costly. These estimate numbers, $200,000 to rebuild it exactly as it is without changing a single thing, and that money spent just gets us back to 1966. We started looking at a $400,000 number to begin relocating the organ. Cassavant's estimates with all of the structural changes and other AV changes that we would have to make gets us up $100,000 or more above the other option. The Kilgan fact, simply 2 complete instruments combined, solves all of the issues that were presented, in terms of the placement, in terms of the tonal design, in terms of having adequate sound for this space and singing, as well as having sound for the choir to be accompaniment. Both instruments combined achieves an appropriate size instrument for this room. As I've talked, the organ cases fit perfectly without structural modifications to either the cases or the building, I might add. Tonally far more appropriate for congregational singing, tonally suitable for folk and contemporary accompaniment, pipes from the golden era of organ building, tonally comparable to other priceless instruments. The main organ would be positioned as the Archdiocese advised in 1966. The quiet choir division, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but these are the kind of the key facts. As I stated, the relocation or the relocation installation of the instrument requires upgrades and changes to the video screen and the AV equipment. If we move the Cassavant, we would have to incur those same costs. That sanctuary restoration, with all of that involved, runs approximately $500,000. I've rounded the numbers up or down to the big numbers just for the sake of discussion.
I just want to, just if you wouldn't mind listening a little bit now to some of the people working on the steering committee. Everybody that I asked, I made just a few phone calls. Everybody I asked said, sure, be glad to help. And so Craig Dursa would like to say a few words.
Although Father did leave my name out in the beginning of the introduction, I'm not sure if you heard that. He mentioned everybody in the steering committee but myself. I'm kidding, of course, Father. Thank you. So I'm gonna, in the world that I come from, okay, I'm a retired police officer from the city of Farmington Hills, 3rd generation. I'm a director of security investigations for one of the largest and most successful businessmen in this region. I'm not going to mention his name, but the reason why I tell you that is one thing. Okay, I'm gonna dumb this down because I needed it to be dumbed down for myself. Okay, I know nothing about Kilgan, and I know nothing about instruments. I'm here and I want to be part of the steering committee because to me, this is about the spiritual experience, okay? I'm not here to sell anything because I can't sell anything. Again, I gave you my background. For those of you that attend 10 o'clock Mass here at St. Pat's, the 3 most important gifts in my life come here with me every Sunday. It's my wife and my 2 boys. I have a 6-month-old and a 2.5-year-old. And the 2.5-year-old, whose name is Cooper, is as engaged in the Mass every single Sunday, if not more so than I am. For those of you who are here at 10 o'clock Mass on Sundays, you probably see him walk up with me and drop the basket at the front of the altar, and he loves to hand the basket and collect and receive the collection basket from the folks. He actually does the old police thing that I did when I was trying to clear an intersection at an accident. He literally will direct you out of the aisle to tell you which way to go in order to receive Eucharist, okay? Cooper loves coming here to St. Pat's. A lot of people refer to their home away from home as work, okay? Our home away from home is here in St. Patrick's Parish, where we'll be here for a very long time, for the sustainable future. Again, when I talk about dumbing it down, I said, hey, look, Father, you need to give me the nuts and bolts. And with all due respect to Aaron, I was the most vocal person at our committee meeting, and I said, I'll go up first. I'm first in the batter's box. I have no idea what you're talking about, Aaron, but tell me what it does for us as a family for the sustainable future. He said, with this, you have the aesthetically pleasing improvements to the altar, along with some other things, right, that Aaron had mentioned, the digital enhancement of the Mass, some beautification of the altar itself, certainly improvement of those who take care of us every week, which is the folks, who are the folks in the choir, right? Again, it's a shame for several decades, some of these folks have been sitting and haven't been able to partake wholly in the Mass, right? So when Aaron started to talk to me about those things and not about, tones and pitches and how many pieces, I started to understanding truly the importance of this project, okay? Thankfully, my boys have their beauty from my wife, they have their intelligence from my wife, but they have again, I can't speak to the 6-month-old yet, but the oldest has the need to want to belong to something and to be part of something, which is, thank goodness, at this point in his life, and hope it continues, is his faith. We also talked about numbers in the committee, and we shot low. And I said, that's a mistake, and here's why. And the analogy I used was a project that we had at our home recently. We had to make some major improvements to our home, and it was going to cost some dough, right? So I told my wife, we're aiming too low, we better go a little bit higher. Thankfully, we did that, because there's always some built-in costs. And the builder said that we absolutely did the right thing. We would have shorted ourselves, because in a year or two, we would have said, what were we thinking? How are we going to come up with this extra money, right? Same thing here. Hey, let's be honest. I think you'd rather have us come at the congregation, at the community, in one fell swoop and aim high, because, again, there are always going to be some hidden costs. We ask that you think about this from a spiritual perspective and about what it means for you. Two things are very important to me when I come into church. Number one, that my family's with me, and number two, that the music sounds beautiful. This organ has done a wonderful thing for us for 50 years. It's time to thank it and say adios and move to a new day here. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stan Politowicz. Most of you know. Hi. How are you? I've been a member here since 1985, and I've seen all of the renovation since then. And to me, this is family, right? You own a home for a long time. You want to renovate. You want to make it better. You want to draw more people in. This is my family. I've been here many, many years. It was kind of funny when the wood came off the front of the marble. Rumors abound. Father Tom spent millions for this marble. I was here when that was the altar. We didn't spend anything. We uncovered it. We're going to uncover the sides. We're going to put pipes in. It's going to be really beautiful. So I'm here to ask you for your support. It's time. It's overdue. And I think with a music ministry, with Aaron's leadership, we're going to be able to draw more people into our community, younger people that will really get excited about the music. So please give, please volunteer, and thank you.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Wisely. My wife and I have been members of St. Pat's since 1998. But I'll make one final point on all this, and it's a spiritual one. We stand in a sacred place, and when you think about what happens on that altar every weekend, when Father says the words of consecration, that bread and wine becomes the body and blood of our Lord. It surpasses. It transcends time, it transcends space, it transcends our ability to even understand it. It's a sacred mystery, and that's why they're called mysteries. So whatever we do back here is always going to pale in comparison to what happens on that altar. But with that said, we have a chance to do something beautiful. We have a chance to improve the way this church looks, the way this church sounds, and the way this church worships. And I think if we think about that and we think about why we're all here every Sunday, it might help us, reach that decision. It's never easy to ask anyone for money. I have kids of my own who ask me constantly, and I'm sure you've all been through that. But think about the worship experience. Think about why we come here every Sunday. Think about what it means, and think about the chance to do something beautiful. St. Ben's was my mother's home parish. My parents were married there. My grandparents were buried there. And it was a very beautiful church, and it was an incredible worship experience there for a lot of years. Demographics have shifted. Those people have moved out of Highland Park. So there's not a community there anymore. But there's a community here, and we are that community, and we have the chance to do something beautiful, and I hope you'll consider it. Thank you.
Really, thank you all for your time. I hope you found tonight's discussions fruitful. I sure did. And again, thank you for your support and time.
I think this parish is going to respond positively, and I certainly hope we can do what we need to do in order to make this possible, because this isn't something that Aaron just brought here. If you heard him speaking along the way, I've been working on this early in 1990s. We revisited it again in 2001 and 2002, visited it in 2006, 2010, and there never was the right combination of everybody together at the right time. And this divine intervention that kind of is going on, everything we've tried to do so far has been so positive. And we thought, this is really almost impossible, to be able to find two instruments that are that compatible that can marry one another. Some of the other people, and Pat, I think, would attest to that. He said, as an architect, he said, an organist himself, he says, this is almost unbelievable that you can find two organs and to be able to see this work out. It wasn't an easy trip all the way for the people who have been working on it so far, and it wasn't easy to free up one of these organs. Aaron didn't tell us about how we had to have this kind of little negotiation going on between me and the present pastor of the church that bought the parish from the Archdiocese of Detroit. We had to do a little negotiation going on last summer, and it took a lot of patience. And eventually we freed it up, and I said, we need to get it under our control someplace, because the whole thing could glitch and stop, and we would be in a real mess. So we're halfway into it, we can't go any farther, what are we going to do now? And then Aaron was able to, find this place. Somebody calls from St. Louis and says, there's an organ that will match that out in Cambridge. So the worst weekend of the whole winter, they set the date, they said we're going at that time. So Rick and Stu, I think, started driving a 27-foot Penske, drove out in that horrible storm. They went up through Canada, I believe, because they couldn't avoid the worst of the storm. They came in from the north, dropped down into the Cambridge area, and they worked together. They got tremendous cooperation from the pastor at the Serbian Orthodox Church. He was real happy to be able to find a new home for this instrument, because they don't use an organ in their, they don't have an accompaniment in their worship service. So they were real happy to get that out of there. I told the pastor of St. Benedict's in Highland Park that he's really getting a great deal out of this, because he said, how much would that be worth? And I said, to you, very little, but to us it's going to mean a great deal. And to see that be junked would be such a waste. And you're going to save all kinds of money. By the way, you've got this beautiful gallery up here. I see you got some TV cameras down there. You do video, right? He said, yeah. And I said, why don't you think about building a studio up here? We'll take all this stuff out of here. You don't need it anyway. And then we had to do a little careful negotiation along the way. And I breathed a sigh of relief when I got the word that it was under our control, and it was in the Russell Industrial Center. And then when the Knights went down and helped unload the organ from Cambridge, they said, this is unbelievable. Who's got the blueprints? And Rick and Aaron said, it's in our head. And it matches. Even the stain of the casement matches. And it's beautiful carved wood. It's going to be just such an addition to the sanctuary. It's a dream I've had for a long time, that when I look back over those documents and found out in 1966 to 68, the whole plan was to put those pipes up there, never back there, according to the best professional opinions we had at the time. It just took a long time to get there. And the right combination now has been brought together with the technicians and the professional opinions and the people willing to work together. And I just feel that in this parish we're going to get a good response. So to answer your question directly, I think we can make it. Okay? Okay.